You describe yourself as a fourth-generation rancher in Cole County, Oklahoma. So what drew you to politics?
I was training cutting horses as a non-pro and was working on the heavy equipment side when a friend of mine, we were doing a project, crawls up on a dozer next to me. We were moving from one location to another, and he said, "Hey, there's a guy by the name of Tom Coburn that's coming to do a town hall. Why don't you go with me?" And so I met Tom Coburn, who at that time was just recently announced he was a candidate for the United States Senate. He was needing someone that had an agricultural background. I'd been a former state FFA president, graduated with an animal science degree, and dual major actually in agriculture. And I knew he was passionate as an evangelical about social issues. I knew he was passionate about turning at that time, what was a $5-6 trillion national indebtedness around. And I knew he was sincere. And so it wasn't long after I went to work for Tom Coburn, and I spent 6 years with him. And it was an incredible mentorship. Anyone that had the privilege to be with Tom Coburn was in for a rare treat. And then many years later, I'd get involved on the state level. I would come back into free market and start a small business, a dozer excavator trucking business. And then recently felt called because I knew I was accountable for really as much as anything, the training I'd received from Tom Coburn, as someone who was forecasting the debt bomb is coming. Not the British are coming, the debt bomb is coming. And so that drew me to want to stand up for my kids and come to Washington, D.C. and right size what I've seen as the growth of unsustainable debt.
It sounds like you're modeling your lawmaker style on Senator Tom Coburn, but how did those experiences prepare you for actually becoming a member of Congress yourself?
Watching someone take hard positions and many times unpopular positions. Look, in politics, most people learn the game. The way that, and it goes into a statement that a gentleman last name Titler, who died in the 1800s, he's a historian, statesman. He said, "Remember, a democracy cannot exist forever. It can only exist until people discover they can vote themselves largesse out of the public treasury." And politicians take advantage of insatiable appetites of people who want to just get more money from their government. And they learn the game of giving away free candy. And it's caused many elected officials to stay in office, but it's been to the detriment of our country. And so I watched an individual be able to put his self-interest second and his national interest first. It was inspiring. I watched him be able to go back home and do many things that were unpopular when it was time to cut spending. He was one of a few that would fixated on the mission of meeting the constitutional mandate of securing the blessing of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. I watched him stand on principle, and I watched him become one of the most trusted people in our state, because the people knew you might disagree with him, but his motive was pure.
Let's talk about how those lessons have carried you to current day, the 118th Congress. Democrats currently have control of the Senate, and Republicans have control of the House. So what do you think that a divided government can achieve?
Well, look, it goes right back to what Steve Largent, Tom Coburn, many others entered into in '95. They had the exact same scenario. You had Bill Clinton in the White House, and you had a Democrat Senate. And the contract with America that was actually the group years later that would balance the budget and get a president at the time to sign work requirements, welfare reform, TANF. And so we, as much as anything, need to be a nation that's encouraging a work ethic again. And the commentary that Leader Scalise put out that I actually complimented him on was on that front. Our leader made that statement publicly yesterday. And so we can learn from history. And in divided government, you can have a Democrat president, as Clinton did, say, you know what, that's reasonable. And so I'm hoping that the current administration will look back to history and say what Clinton did in signing welfare reform and believing that the best social program is a job is worth repeating.
Do you think in the next 2 years you and your colleagues can balance the budget?
Look, every year that has been the can kicking exercise has made it from years ago. It was a $7 trillion attempt in 10 years. Now we're in a $14 trillion attempt to be able to square with the House in 10 years. We are on an unsustainable path. And every year that they've not addressed it, it's gotten worse. So here's what I can say. This year, we're going to overspend by 1.4 trillion. That's our deficit. That's the size of our entire gross national debt in 1983 was 1.4 trillion. 200 years as a nation to get to 1.4 trillion. We will overspend in 1 year this year what it took 40 years ago to get to as a sum total national indebtedness. But Brittany, the numbers don't stop there. You take that same 1.4 trillion, the CBO's information that came out says 10 years from now, we'll spend 1.4 trillion just on interest payments, money flushed down the toilet without touching principal. So we are up against a fiscal cliff. Within 5 years, what we spend on national defense will match what we spend on debt service payments, on interest only. So we have to start cutting spending. We have to start reinvigorating our economy. We have to get energy dominance back on the table. We have to start being smart in the policies we're putting forward to inject a boom in our economy. If we can get growth, we can go back to, we've been in 2% growth because of our debt, because of bad policies. If we can get to 3% GDP growth, which is not something that was uncommon for many years. It's just only been in recent years we've been on 2%. And if we can start proving to the American people that we can actually cut the size scope of the federal government and actually become a constitutional republic again that says there's 18 enumerated powers and there's certain things the federal government's supposed to do, but the 10th Amendment, we're supposed to also let the states do the things that are not enumerated in those 18 enumerated powers of Article 1, Section 8. If we can return power and decision-making back to our states and restrain our spending habits, there's hope for this country.